My beloved child. Stop scrolling for just a moment, because what has found you now is not meant to feel ordinary. Something has been waiting beneath the surface of this connection, something you may have sensed without ever being able to name. You have questioned certain silences. You have noticed moments when their eyes seem to carry words their lips refuse to speak. You have wondered why someone who can appear so certain one day can suddenly become distant, guarded, almost impossible to understand the next. And tonight, in this fictional message of divine reflection, heaven draws you closer to one question you have quietly carried for longer than you admit: who is this person when nobody is watching? Do not rush away from this moment. The answer is not what your fear has been whispering. This is not a revelation designed to frighten you, nor is it a reason to accuse anyone in your real life. This story is about the hidden emotional world behind the mask, about the difference between the person someone learned to become and the person their heart has always wanted to be. And there is something about your soulmate that changes the meaning of nearly everything you thought you understood about them. You have seen the version they allow the world to see. Strong. Controlled. Independent. Perhaps even unaffected. They may behave as though they can walk away from anything without looking back. They may speak carefully, keeping their deepest emotions behind walls built so elegantly that almost nobody notices those walls exist. When people ask whether they are okay, they know exactly how to smile. When someone comes too close to the truth, they know how to change the subject. When emotions become too intense, they retreat into silence because silence has protected them before. But you, beloved child, became a problem for that carefully constructed identity. Not because you did something wrong. Because somehow, without forcing your way inside, you began reaching places within them that they had hidden even from themselves. That is why this connection has sometimes felt contradictory. One moment, you could feel warmth moving toward you. The next, everything seemed uncertain. One moment, there was an unmistakable tenderness in their presence. Then suddenly came distance, hesitation, or a silence that left you questioning whether you had imagined the connection entirely. Yet beneath those changes, something continued pulling your attention back toward one unresolved truth. There was more happening than you could see. Imagine them alone late at night after everyone else has disappeared into their own lives. There is no audience now. No one expects anything from them. The room is quiet enough for thoughts to become loud. Their phone rests nearby. Your memory arrives without permission. And suddenly, the person who appears so emotionally controlled during the day is not controlled at all. They remember something you said. Something small. Perhaps you do not even remember saying it. But they do. They replay your expression. They remember how you looked when you were trying not to reveal what you felt. They remember the way your energy changed during a particular conversation. They remember the moment you almost said something important and then stopped yourself. And that memory unsettles them, because it touches the part of their heart they have spent years convincing themselves they no longer needed. Here is where the mystery deepens. Their distance was never as simple as indifference. In this story, your soulmate learned long ago that revealing too much could cost them something. Perhaps they once trusted someone who treated their vulnerability carelessly. Perhaps they were taught that strength meant never needing reassurance. Perhaps life forced them to become emotionally self-sufficient before they were ready. Whatever the origin, they developed an identity that became almost impossible to separate from who they truly were. I am fine. I don't need anyone. I can handle everything myself. It doesn't matter. I have moved on. These became more than words. They became armor. Then you appeared. And armor works beautifully until someone arrives who makes you want to remove it. That is what they did not expect. They expected attraction to fade. They expected curiosity to disappear. They expected time or distance to make you less significant. They believed that if they ignored the feeling long enough, eventually their heart would become quiet again. But the opposite happened. The more they tried to dismiss what they felt, the more specific their feelings became. They did not simply miss having someone around. They missed you. Your presence. Your voice. The strange comfort they associated with you. The way you made ordinary moments feel charged with meaning. And this frightened them more than they wanted anyone to know. There is something else you must understand before the larger revelation can unfold. Your soulmate has not only been hiding feelings from you. They have been hiding the depth of those feelings from people around them. Someone close to them noticed. Not because your soulmate confessed everything, but because people who know us well can recognize when our patterns change. They became quieter when your name appeared. They became unusually defensive when someone misunderstood you. They started asking questions that sounded casual but were anything but casual. Do you think people can reconnect after a long silence? Do you think timing can ruin something that was meant to happen? Can someone care deeply and still be afraid to show it? The person listening may not have understood immediately. But eventually they did. This was about you. And when your soulmate realized they had revealed too much, they pulled back again. That is the pattern you have been witnessing. Reveal. Retreat. Feel. Hide. Move closer. Become afraid. Move away. Then wonder why moving away hurts more than staying. But tonight, something within this fictional story shifts. Because the mask is becoming heavier than the truth. Your soulmate is tired of maintaining an image that no longer matches what is happening inside them. There comes a point when pretending not to care requires more energy than simply admitting that you do. There comes a point when silence stops feeling safe and begins feeling like a prison. They are approaching that point. And this is where you may begin to understand why the title of this message says they are not who they pretend to be. You may have assumed they were emotionally unavailable. But beneath the surface, they feel deeply. You may have assumed they had forgotten. But certain memories involving you remain astonishingly vivid. You may have assumed they were completely confident. But they have questioned themselves repeatedly because of this connection. You may have assumed they were the one holding all the power. Yet privately, they have wondered whether you would still choose them if you saw everything they have kept hidden. That last question matters. Because their deepest fear is not simply rejection. Their deepest fear is recognition. Being fully seen. Being known beyond the polished version. Having someone look directly at their uncertainty, their mistakes, their tenderness, their complicated history, and still remain. They know how to survive being admired from a distance. They do not know what to do with someone who might genuinely know them. And your presence made that possibility real. There was a moment, perhaps long before you realized anything important was happening, when they understood that you could see through them. Maybe you asked a question nobody else had asked. Maybe you noticed they were not okay when everyone else accepted their smile. Maybe you gave them kindness at a moment when they expected judgment. Maybe you simply looked at them differently. Whatever happened, something within them whispered, "This person sees me." And instead of immediately bringing them closer, it terrified them. That may seem strange. Shouldn't being understood feel comforting? Sometimes. But when someone has survived by hiding their emotional world, being understood can initially feel like losing control. Suddenly the old defenses stop working. The jokes do not distract you. The silence does not convince you. The distance does not erase what existed. And somewhere inside them, your soulmate began wondering how much you could actually see. That is why certain conversations between you may have felt unfinished. Words were almost spoken. Confessions almost surfaced. Truth reached the edge of their lips and then disappeared. You may have felt frustrated by this. You may have wondered why they could not simply say what they meant. But there was a reason. Because once they said it aloud, they could no longer pretend the connection was insignificant. And if the connection mattered, then losing it could hurt. So they remained suspended between two fears. The fear of opening their heart and the fear of losing you because they waited too long. Now the second fear is becoming stronger. Something has changed recently within them. It was not dramatic. No thunder. No sudden miracle. Just one quiet realization. They imagined you moving forward without them. Not waiting. Not wondering. Not checking for signs. Simply living. And for the first time, the possibility did not feel theoretical. It felt real. They imagined another person discovering the qualities in you they had been too afraid to openly cherish. They imagined someone else receiving the conversations they kept postponing. Someone else hearing your laughter. Someone else learning what makes you feel safe. Someone else becoming the person you turn toward naturally. And suddenly their silence no longer felt protective. It felt expensive. Because silence could cost them you. That realization opened something. But there is still another layer. The most important one. Your soulmate has a side of themselves almost nobody knows. It is not sinister. It is not something you need to fear. It is simply extraordinarily different from the identity they present publicly. Behind the composure is someone deeply sentimental. Behind the independence is someone who longs for emotional security. Behind the confidence is someone who has quietly wondered whether they are truly worthy of the kind of love they desire. Behind the silence is someone who has rehearsed conversations with you that never happened. They have imagined telling you the truth. They have imagined your response. They have imagined you misunderstanding. They have imagined you understanding perfectly. They have even imagined the silence afterward. Every possible outcome has crossed their mind because this matters far more than they intended it to. But one imagined conversation keeps returning. In it, they finally stop pretending. They look at you without the usual defenses and admit something they have never been able to explain properly. I was not distant because I felt nothing. I became distant because I felt more than I knew how to handle. Those words contain the doorway. But they are not yet the full revelation. There is something behind them. Something from their past that shaped the way they behave when love becomes real. And until you understand that piece, their contradictions will never completely make sense. Long before this connection, your soulmate made an internal promise. They may not have spoken it aloud. Perhaps they were younger. Perhaps they had just experienced disappointment. Perhaps they watched a relationship around them collapse and silently decided they would never become emotionally dependent on another person. Whatever happened, they told themselves they would remain in control. Never chase. Never reveal too much. Never hand someone enough emotional power to hurt them. And for years, that strategy seemed to work. Then came you. You did not break the promise. Their own heart did. Because suddenly they cared whether you stayed. They cared what you thought. They noticed your absence. They felt the difference when communication changed. They became aware of things about themselves they had ignored for years. And that created an internal conflict far larger than you knew. Part of them wanted to surrender to the connection. Another part wanted to escape before surrender became necessary. This is why you must not interpret every retreat as proof that you meant nothing. Within this fictional story, some retreats happened precisely because you meant too much. Yet this message is not asking you to wait forever for someone who refuses to communicate. It is not asking you to abandon boundaries, chase uncertainty, or build your life around another person's hidden feelings. Divine love does not require you to lose yourself. Real connection must eventually become honest, mutual, and grounded in action. That truth matters because something extraordinary happens when you stop trying to decode every silence. You reclaim your peace. And strangely, that is exactly when your soulmate begins confronting themselves. When you stop carrying the emotional weight for both people, they can finally feel the weight they have avoided. When you stop reaching into the silence becomes theirs to answer. When you stop proving your value, they must decide whether they are brave enough to recognize it. And that is the place where they stand now. At a threshold. They can continue performing the identity that kept them safe, or they can become honest about the person underneath it. But there is something you still do not know. Someone recently said something to them about you. It was only one sentence. Yet that sentence followed them for hours. At first, they dismissed it. Then they replayed it. Later, when they were alone, they heard it again in their mind. The person had looked at them carefully and said something that struck directly through every defense they had built. They did not respond immediately. They simply became quiet. Because suddenly another person had recognized the truth they had been trying desperately not to acknowledge. And the truth was this. Every time your soulmate spoke as though they were completely finished with this connection, their behavior told a different story. Their attention changed when you were mentioned. Their expression changed. Their voice changed. They remembered details someone who didn't care would never remember. And once this was pointed out, they could no longer hide from themselves quite as easily. That night, they confronted a question they had avoided. What am I actually afraid of? Not you. Not love. Not even commitment. They were afraid of becoming the version of themselves they had buried. The tender version. The honest version. The version who wants to be chosen. The version who would admit, yes, I care. And beloved child, this is where the revelation begins becoming larger. Because the person beneath their mask is not weaker than the person you have seen. They are stronger. They are simply afraid to reveal that strength in its most vulnerable form. True strength is not pretending nothing touches you. It is allowing yourself to care while knowing care involves risk. True courage is not maintaining perfect emotional control. It is speaking honestly when silence would be easier. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this. Slowly. Painfully. But unmistakably. There is another detail, though. One they have told almost nobody. At some point, they kept something connected to you. Not necessarily an object. It could be a message, a photograph, a memory, a phrase, a song, or even a tiny detail they revisit mentally. They kept it because it represents a version of the connection that felt uncomplicated. Before fear entered. Before overthinking. Before distance. Before both hearts started protecting themselves. Whenever they return to that memory, they remember who they were around you before their defenses awakened. And they miss that person. They miss themselves. This is why your role in this story is larger than simply being someone they care about. You became a mirror. Through you, they glimpsed the person they might become if they stopped living entirely through fear. That realization changes everything. Because now their struggle is not simply, should I tell this person how I feel? It is, am I willing to become honest with myself? And heaven cannot answer that question for them. You cannot answer it for them. Love cannot force them. They must choose. But something is moving them toward that choice. A conversation is approaching. Perhaps not exactly as they imagined. Perhaps not with perfect words. Perhaps not at the perfect time. But the pressure of everything unsaid is building. And the mask is cracking. Before that happens, however, there is one final truth about their identity you need to hear. Remember the title. Your soulmate is not who they pretend to be. You have been waiting to discover what stands behind those unfinished words. In reality, your soulmate is a. You might expect a dramatic label. But the answer is deeper than a label. In reality, your soulmate is a person standing between two versions of themselves. One version knows how to survive. The other is learning how to love. The survivor knows how to disappear emotionally. The lover wants to stay. The survivor says, protect yourself. The lover whispers, tell them. The survivor remembers every old disappointment. The lover keeps remembering you. And these two versions have been fighting silently inside the same heart. Until now. Because recently something happened that tipped the balance. Something small enough that nobody around them understood its importance. But your soulmate understood. It involved you. And after it happened, they made a decision they have not yet revealed. That decision is why their energy has changed. It is why they have been thinking about the words they never said. It is why the possibility of losing this connection suddenly feels unbearable. And it is why, in a quiet moment when nobody else was listening, they finally admitted to themselves the sentence they had spent so long refusing to say. They know who you are to them now. But that is not the secret that will surprise you most. Because immediately after admitting it, they reached for something they had hidden away. A message connected to you that they never expected to look at again. They opened it. They read it slowly. And halfway through, they stopped. There was one detail inside that message they had somehow overlooked before. One detail that completely changed what they believed about you. For several seconds, they simply stared at the words. Then they whispered something into the empty room. Something they had never allowed themselves to say aloud. And what they whispered reveals exactly who they have been pretending not to be, and what they are preparing to do next.